Krishna Brahmatirtha Prabhu. Can you hear us? I think you're mute right now. Yeah, we can hear you.
Well, good morning, everyone, unless you're watching from China, and then good evening. Okay. Okay, let's see. Do I have screen share on? No, make me co-host if you can, then I can use screen share and other features.
I know, but I think only one person can be a host.
No, you can have co-hosts.
I think in our, like the Zoom account that we have.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, either I make you the host or I'm the host. So I can screen share and whatever the verse you want.
Okay, very good.
Or I can let you share the screen. Yeah, you can share the screen.
Okay, that's all I need. We'll
Yeah.
begin. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, let me adjust my screen here a second. Okay, now I pinned it so I can see everyone present. I wish I could be there with you in person. And with COVID going around, I haven't been there in a long time. And I understand that Krishna House now has become the poison zone. But how is everyone feeling now? Is anyone still sick? Okay. Most of you have been vaccinated. So that means you'll get sick, but not very sick. And those who didn't get vaccinated and got very sick are just there. They're serving a purpose to teach us a lesson that better we get vaccinated. But now I realize that's my personal opinion. Some may disagree, but I'm a scientist. I looked into it from every angle. And there are some people who, due to certain physical circumstances and conditions, are best not getting vaccinated, according to my doctor. But for the overwhelming majority of us, vaccinations begun in the American Revolutionary War. The first were invented for smallpox, and it works. So putting that political commentary aside, we'll begin with this very, very important chapter. Today, we're discussing pure devotional service, the change in heart. Now, back when Prabhupada came to America, he brought with him trunks of the original Bhagavatams, and that was all there was. So when it came time to print books, Prabhupada's fledgling movement didn't have the resources to print whole volumes. So they printed small volumes. And one volume was called The Lord in the Heart. Another was called The Change in Heart. And they were small books. We have some of these actually in our archives at the BI. And when I was reading it, this particular chapter struck me very deeply. Again, it was a small booklet. It's all we had to read then. And it struck me so deeply because every one of us, at least I'll speak for myself, almost every one of us has material desires. and when we, and sometimes we may want this kind of sense gratification or that kind, or sometimes praise or honor, our false ego. I mean, every day, every one of you, because you're Hare Krishnas, you do something the rest of the world does not always do. Can somebody think what that is? Because you're Hare Krishnas, you do something. In India, almost everyone does this every day, if they're a Hare Krishna or not. But in the Western world, a lot of people don't do this. What's the one thing that we do that a lot of people don't do, but everyone in India does? Can somebody tell me?
Visits the temple?
Say again?
Visits the temple?
I don't visit the temple. I'm home.
Your temple's at home.
Yeah, I'm home. Visit the temple every day by Zoom. But one thing that all Hare Krishnas do, and all Indians do, but the rest of the world isn't so good at. It's important.
Chanting.
No, not all Indians chant. I've been in India. A lot of the Indians are chanting money, money, money.
Kevin answered on Zoom, shower.
Yes, shower. In India, even the poorest person, you'll see, who has nothing, well, in the morning, go to a well, pump some water, put on their gamsha and pour it over themselves. In India, everyone showers. And Hare Krishnas, everyone showers. Now, we shower for various reasons. One of the reasons is it's cleanliness of the body leads to cleanliness of the mind. Another reason is if you don't shower, you're going to smell bad. One devotee from Alachua was leading a bus tour of devotees from a third world country. And there was a place where they don't have that habit of showering enough, and there was no such thing as deodorant. And he was on a truck, on a bus going from one city to another. And then he just couldn't take it anymore. So he took out a fresh stick of deodorant, showed everyone how to put it on, and passed it down the whole bus. That really happened. So we keep ourselves clean every day. And so we may have our various material desires, but we try every day to scrub. Prabhupada, of course, we were accused of brainwashing a lot in the 70s. And when a reporter asked Prabhupada, you know his famous response, your movement has been accused of brainwashing. And Prabhupada said, yes, we scrub them brains clean every day. So in that sense, we every day try to immerse ourselves in some higher consciousness. And this particular section here talks about that if you have material desires or don't have material desires, what do you do? Turns out, oddly enough, it's the same thing. Now think about that a minute. If you have every material desire and no material desire, you do the same thing. That may seem somewhat counterintuitive. Well, if I have no material desires, then what do I need to do to purify myself? Why bother doing these things? I'm free of all material desires. Prabhupada was on his deathbed, and one of his God brothers came to see him hours before he passed on. And he said to him, so what can I do? What do you need? What do you desire? And Prabhupada gave an amazing response. Some of his last words, I have no desires. There was no material desires. He didn't have any. Now, I used to work way back when I was in college in a hospital. I was a orderly for 2 summers. Very, very interesting job, because in the West, we tend to be sheltered from birth, death, old age, and disease. We kind of hide it. You know, you're old, you go to an old age home. You're diseased, you go to a hospital. You're being born is on the house at a birthing center. We don't see these things going on. And therefore, for me, it was sort of like that Buddha moment when the Buddha, for those who have read Siddhartha, we don't know a lot about the Buddha's life because there were no contemporaneous authors. It all came later. But using the Siddhartha version by Hermann Hesse, he was living the gilded life in the palace, and everything was fine. Everyone was happy. Servants were happy. Masters are happy. Everyone's happy, happy, happy. And then he stepped out and saw the misery that was outside the palace walls and people suffering. And at that, he said, whoa, what's going on here? And he said, I want to understand the source of suffering. And he went to a place in India called Bodh Gaya and meditated under the Bodhi tree. I've been to that sapling of that very tree. I meditated under it myself. Nothing happened. But anyway, I'm not the Buddha, so what can we say? So anyway, and he had his enlightenment experience. So when I worked at a hospital, I hadn't really seen these things. You know, one grandmother had died, and you know, it was very painful for me. And I really, growing up, trying to figure out what death was. It was very bewildering to me. You know, people would die, and I intuitively knew no one could really die. And what was it? So when I worked at this hospital, it gave me a chance to explore deeper. What's it about? And I had learned the Maha Mantra. I didn't know devotees at all, but I learned it from the Hair album, which had come out. I saw Jayadvaita Swami at a party chanting New York. So I learned the Maha Mantra. So I used to wheel my patients around chanting Hare Krishna, not knowing what it was, but liking it a lot. And I'd wheel the patients around and watch what happens when people are in the worst of physical conditions. And I'd see old people dropped off at the hospital by their relatives and never coming to visit them and not caring if they're dead or alive. And people lying in bed wondering, what's it all about? Why are things like this? What's going on? And for me, it was a total, I was there with my eyes wide open. What is this about? Because I was seeing the harsh side of the world, which in India, I went to India after that experience. You see death, you see disease, you see these things all over the place. But, you know, you see people dying on the streets, you see people suffering. When I went to India, it was like, okay, the world is, it's like leaving a Disney set and entering the real world. I just left Universal Studios and entered the real world, because in our world, everything is sanitized. So we're not quite the real world. The real world does have all these concomitant factors of the threefold miseries and birth and death. So at the hospital, it all of a sudden became real to me, made me very, very philosophical. And I tried to be really nice to my patients because I felt so bad for them, but I couldn't. Ironically, the only thing I could really do for the people I had to care for was Hare Krishna. And I didn't have any idea the benefit. I just liked the mantra. So I'd just be chanting all the time, not realizing that's really what they needed. And I'd watch old people in bed, and they would be lamenting sometimes, what good is being in bed? I can no longer have sex now. They would say things like that to me. Very old, miserable people. What good is this being in bed? And what's the point of life? And people were so miserable. So I vowed I never want to be like that if I ever reach that age. I'm getting close. So with that said, and that as a way of introduction, we'll begin with the verses. Now we have 10 verses, so we'll go through it very quickly. I'm going to ask somebody to grab a microphone and I want to read verses 1 through 9. So do we have any good readers so I can preserve my voice? Yes. Is that Paula there? I see. Yes. Okay. Paula, how are you feeling now?
I'm feeling better. Thank you.
Okay. Go for it and read loudly so everyone on Facebook and Zoom can hear you.
Sri Shukadev Goswami said, Maharaj Parikshit, as you have inquired from me as to the duty of the intelligent man who is on the threshold of death, so I have answered you. One who desires to be absorbed in the impersonal Brahmajyoti effulgence should worship the master of the Vedas, Lord Brahma or Brihaspati, the learned priest. One who desires powerful sex should worship the heavenly king Indra, and one who desires good progeny should worship the great progenitors called the Prajapatis. Should worship the heavenly king Indra, and one who desires good fortune should worship Durga Devi, the superintendent of the material world. One desiring to be very powerful should worship fire, and one who aspires only after money should worship the Vasus. One should worship the Rudra incarnation of Lord Shiva if he wants to be a great hero. One who wants a large stock of grains should worship Aditi. One who desires to attain the heavenly planets should worship the sons of Aditi. One who desires a worldly kingdom should worship Vishvadev. And one who wants to be popular with the general mass of population should worship the Sadhya demigod. One who desires a long span of life should worship the demigods known as the Ashvini Kumaras. And a person desiring a strong-built body should worship the earth. One who desires stability in his post should worship the horizon and the earth combined. One who desires to be beautiful should worship the beautiful resident of the Gandharva planet. And one who desires a good wife should worship the Asparas and the Urvashi society girls of the heavenly kingdom. One who desires domination over others should worship Lord Brahma, the head of the universe. One who desires tangible fame should worship the personality of Godhead. And one who desires a good bank balance should worship the demigod Varuna. If one desires to be a greatly learned man, he should worship Lord Shiva. And if one desires a good marital relation, he should worship the chaste goddess Uma, the wife of Lord Shiva. One should worship Lord Vishnu or his devotee for spiritual advancement in knowledge, and for protection of heredity and advancement of a dynasty, one should worship the various demigods. One who desires domination over a kingdom or an empire should worship the Manus. One who desires victory over an enemy should worship the demons. And one who desires sense gratification should worship the moon. But one who desires nothing of material enjoyment should worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Okay, thank you. You read very nicely. You do. Okay, so now if you could read one more verse, verse 10, you can read that now.
A person who has broader intelligence, whether he be full of all material desire, without any material desire, or desiring liberation, must by all means worship the Supreme Whole, the personality of Godhead.
Okay, and I'll read some of the purport. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, is described in the Gita as Purushottama, or the Supreme Personality. It is he only who can award liberation to the impersonalists by absorbing such aspirants in the Brahmayoti, the bodily rays of the Lord. The Brahmayoti is not separate from the Lord, as a glowing sun ray is not independent of the sun disk. Therefore, one who desires to merge into the supreme impersonal Brahmayoti must also worship the Lord by bhakti yoga, as recommended in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, I had told this story in a prior class, so I'll repeat it very briefly. Prabhupada talks about yogis. What does a yogi do once they've reached the Brahmayoti, but they're still in this corporal body. What does a yogi do? Can someone tell me? Prabhupada talks about it. What does a yogi end up doing? They've reached their enlightenment. They understand, and this happens to some, they're not this body, and they understand the oneness of the unity behind the diversity. They don't understand the Supreme Personality of yet, but they understand these aspects. What do they end up doing? Prabhupada talked about it. Can anybody recall or take a guess? There are no wrong guesses. It might not be the best guess, but any guesses?
I've heard that they engage in welfare activities, humanitarian work.
They engage in what activities?
Welfare activities, humanitarian philanthropy.
That's true. Who's that speaking? Because it's cut off.
It's Narottam Das Thakur.
Okay. Thank you, Narottam Das. You said it very well. Okay. Now, there was a book, there was a yogi, Kornman was his name, and he went to India and he climbed the mountain, as they say, and got enlightened. And he did get a lot of realizations. I've read some of his work. And then he came back to America. There's this old comic strip. There's this yogi, American yogi, sitting on top of a mountain with a long beard, meditating. And this old lady is climbing the mountain, going through great austerity to climb the mountain to get to see the yogi. And when she finally gets there into the yogi's cave, and the yogi says, "Oh, you've gone through such austerity, ma'am, what can I do for you? What is it you want to know?" And the lady says, "Sheldon, come home." It's his mother. Anyway, there's a comic strip like that. So this guy was kind of like that. He was up in the mountains and he came home. And then he wrote a book. And it was a very interesting title to the book. Sariputta, the great scientist, actually gave me the book for my birthday because he thought it was very relevant for us, and it was. And the name of the book is very, very telling. And the name of the book, anybody know the name of the book? Okay, here it goes. After enlightenment, there is the laundry. So after you get enlightened, you still have to do the laundry. You still have to do mundane things. And the theme of the book was, once you get enlightened, just be nice to other people. Now, that is not a terrible idea. I mean, where in the Bhagavad Gita does Krishna say that? Krishna specifically says that in the Bhagavad Gita. Can somebody tell me where Krishna says it? This is a little bit of a difficult question, but it's in the middle, kind of, or it's 2/3 of the way through the Gita, to be precise. Can somebody tell me where Krishna says that? And anybody feel a little extra scholarly today?
I'm feeling like it's in the 12th chapter. Right there. Is the verse you're referring to in the 12th chapter?
And what does he say?
It's Samasatrocha, right? He's equal to the enemy and the friend, like what kind of a devotee he likes, and he describes all the qualities of a devotee, and he describes that, yeah, he's equal to his enemy and friends, and it's also indifferent to prestige or like adoration or disrespect and all these sorts of qualities.
That's a good answer, except one little aspect. That's if one's a devotee. But in this case, I'm saying if one's not a devotee. Krishna says, I'll give a hint. It's not the 11th chapter and it's not the 13th chapter. So I just gave a hint. Okay, I'll tell you. Krishna says, and this is the only scripture I've ever seen that talks like directly like this, straightforward. If you're unable to work in this consciousness, I mean Krishna consciousness, then try to act giving up the results of all your work. Try to be self-situated. And so Krishna is giving a series of things. First, just worship me, fix your mind upon me, you'll always live in me. And if you cannot do that, then follow the regulative principles so you get a desire to obtain in me. If you cannot do that, then work for me, because by working for me, you'll become perfect. And if you're unable to work for me, then act trying to give up the results of your work. In other words, be charitable. If you can't work for me directly and think of me directly, then at least don't give up the results, do something philanthropic, at least get out of the selfish concept of life. That's the least you can do to kind of be on the human platform. So this Cornman, he did that. But it's the least. It's not the most. Now we're going to get into what the most is. So I'm trying to give a context to what we're talking about here. So now we're going on to continuing here. So in the previous chapters, Bhakti Yoga is the ultimate goal. Bhakti Yoga thus becomes a supreme means of self-realization. It is recommended here, everyone must seriously take up the methods of Bhakti Yoga, even though one aspires for material enjoyment. So what he's saying is, what Prabhupada is saying, and reflecting on what Krishna says, is even if you have material desires or don't have it, you do Bhakti Yoga. Because if you don't have material desires, then you're not like Cornman, who's kind of merged into some white light. You actually know your position as a servant, so you engage in service. And if you're not fully realized, then by engaging in service, then you learn your position. I'll tell you a story that puts that in context. One time I was at a class, and I asked Satsarup Maharaj a question way back, a very intelligent person. And I said, Maharaj, sometimes we're at Artik and I don't feel like dancing. Have any of you ever had that? You're at Artik and you just don't feel like even moving your feet at all? Who has felt like that? Raise your hands and be honest. You're all in Maya. Okay. Okay. So no, me too, like that. I join you in that Maya. Okay. So sometimes it's like that. So I said, Satsarup Maharaj, what do we do? I'm at Artik. I just don't feel like dancing. And he gave me some very simple, brilliant advice. And this is the same thing Krishna is saying herein in this verse. And he said to me, just dance. In a moment, you'll feel like it. So when I get to Artik and I'm all on the mental plane and dulled out, and the guy next to me is banging kartals too loud, and the person on the other side has a voice that makes a constipated frog sound wonderful. And I have a voice like that, so I know. And you know, all these little things are distracting me, and the fan is blowing too hard or too soft, and you know, my feet hurt and the floor is too hard. The list goes on and on and on, because that's the nature of the mind. I just remember Satsarup Maharaj's words and said, oh, well, might as well dance. And I start moving my feet a little. And then the next thing I know, the deities and I are having a conversation. It's magical. It's absolutely mystical, magical. And the nice thing is it works. It's so simple. Prabhupada used to say, Krishna consciousness is simple, but not easy. Simple, but not easy. Because we have to take some effort. So, I mean, sense gratification is very easy, but not simple. Because it creates a, for example, it's now Thanksgiving time. My kids are visiting, grandkids. So what did I do too much of? Eat. Usually I'm pretty good about eating. I have a breakfast that fits in a palmful, a protein shake for lunch. And I try to, for health, control what I eat. But all the kids are here. So now I got on the scale this morning and I said, what is the result of lack of sense control? We can see it. It's difficult. So now I have to go through some austerities to get back to proper shape. So it's like that. That's the nature of it. It may be easy to eat a lot. It may be very, very easy, but it's not so simple how it works. It gets sense gratification has its consequences. So now we're thinking, but I still have sense desire. What do I do? What do I do? Boy, what a good question. And herein, Sukadev Goswami is answering that question. I have a body, it has desires. How many of you have been considering this position? You're at a Bhagavatam class. Let's say you're in a Lachwa and it's a big class. And then it's time for questions. And you have a really good question to ask. Really good question. And you hope you get called on because it's a really intelligent question. And you're hoping the speaker will say, wow, what a good question. And you don't get called upon. What? You could always ask somebody else that question, but I've had this happen to me. I mean, and false ego gets a little ding, ding, ding. It's like that. Or worse yet, you do get called on and then ask a really dumb question. The very first time I met Prabhupada, which was before I met him in Mayapur, I'd met him briefly in Calcutta. I asked one of the dumbest questions I've ever asked. It was such a, have I told you that story? I don't remember. Such a dumb question. I was visiting Calcutta and there was a sign, Hare Krishna festival. So I went to it because I went to India wondering if Hare Krishna is legitimate. So many crazy gurus coming to the West of those. After Prabhupada came, a slew of them started coming. And some of them were really weird people. One guy was an overweight 14-year-old guru who it turns out spoke Gita very well, but claimed he was Krishna. And I found that a little hard to believe. But turns out that I know friends, one devotee that became a life member when I was life membership director and then became a wonderful initiate devotee is from the same village as this phony guru. He told me the whole family were like carnival performers. And he had the trick where he'd rub your eyeball. And if you rub your eyeball, you excite the optic nerve and you get flashes of white light. So foolish people would think, oh, now I've seen the Brahmayoti. All he did was rub their eyeball. And these things were going on. So I said, only if I go to India will I find out the truth. So I saw a sign, Hare Krishna festival. I immediately took a trolley to it. I happened to be visiting Calcutta. And there was Giriraj Swami giving a lecture that to this day, I mean, it's 50 years later, almost to the day, I still remember the lecture. It was so good and so insightful. And then I went to the temple and there was Prabhupada. And I said, oh, this is the guru of this movement. I'd read the Gita several times, but not Prabhupada's, hadn't been out, Mayavad Gitas. And so I said, do you want to ask a question? So I said, sure. And I'd just come from Bodh Gaya. Now, Bodh Gaya was where the Buddha received his enlightenment. And I just sat under a sapling. They led to the exact same tree as I told you. So I was thinking, wow, this is exciting. Now I can ask him a question. So, ready for the dumb question? I said to Prabhupada, well, why not become Buddhist? Okay, just come from Bodh Gaya. Why Hindu? Why not Buddhism? Now, Prabhupada gave a predictable answer. And the answer, Prabhupada did not like discussing isms. He said this to me several times, not Hinduism, not Buddhism, not capitalism, not communism. He wanted to discuss philosophy. So ism, who knows what an ism is? What does Buddhism mean? What does Hinduism mean? Prabhupada wanted to discuss what's the philosophical point. So then he turned to me and he said, well, what did the Buddha say? He wanted to turn it from ism to philosophy. So I said, what did the Buddha say? Well, I took Oriental philosophy. I know that answer. So I said, well, there are fourfold noble path and eight this, or is it 4 of this and 8 of that? And I kept saying, getting all mixed up in my mind. I couldn't remember. And I said, I don't know. He said, well, then why are you asking that question? And at that point, I zipped it and shut up. I said, I am just here to listen. So then when I met Prabhupada later, I was ready for more serious discussion because I wasn't going to make that stupid mistake twice. So we'll continue here. So a kama is one who has no material desire. A living being, naturally being part and parcel of the whole, has his natural function to serve the supreme being, just as the parts and parcels are meant to serve the body. Just like if your hand doesn't feed your mouth, it can't really absorb the food like this. It doesn't work very well. Desireless means not to be inert like a stone, but to be conscious. What's the modern term for being conscious of one's actual position? That term didn't even exist in Prabhupada's day. Prabhupada says, be conscious of one's actual position. What's the modern term for that? Somebody help me. Very modern, very common. You all know it.
Trying to be woke.
Yeah, I'm not even sure. Not the term I'm thinking of. That's it. I can never quite figure out what woke actually means, but go on. Another term, even more common.
Mindful.
Mindful. So you could substitute here, where Prabhupada said desireless means not to be inert like stone, but to be conscious of one's actual position. In other words, mindful. That's what it means. That's what Prabhupada's saying. He's predicting the mindfulness movement and thus desires satisfaction from the Lord. That's what mindfulness means, being aware. And aware means aware of who we are, of who our relation with Krishna. Just aware of, like, for example, in the first session of any mindfulness training, this goes back to Thakna Khan taught this technique. You take a raisin. I always use raisins for some reason. And anybody here taking a mindfulness course? Did you eat a raisin? I've taken some courses. They always have you eat a raisin. So you chew on a raisin, you chew it very slowly to taste the texture, the taste, everything else. All I end up is thinking, damn, I want the whole box. I'm hungry, but that's not what I had the worst opposite effect on me, like it's supposed to. I'm supposed to be mindful. I just got hungry. But anyway, and you munch on a raisin. And you munch on a raisin so you get the essence of it. And they teach you the body scan to be aware of your body. It's a useful technique. And mindfulness was becoming so popular. I said, well, if I'm going to really understand and do my outreach work, I'd better understand what it's about. And some of the techniques are useful, like hatha yoga techniques are useful for good health, but it's not the essence. It doesn't take us to the real essence of why we're doing it. So mindfulness then can be a useful technique, as Prabhupada said, be conscious of one's actual position. But if mindfulness doesn't take us to that, it's not very useful. This means that one should feel happy, and I'm only going to read a few lines of this, by experiencing the happiness of Supreme Lord. This intuition of living being is sometimes manifested during the conditioned stage of living in the material world, and such intuition is expressed in the form of altruism, philanthropy, socialism, communism, by the undeveloped minds of less intelligent people. Here, Prabhupada is saying what he says in the 12th canto, in the 12th chapter of the Gita, or what Krishna says, to be precise. So a more highly developed conscience says, we don't want to be selfish. Our intuition is we should do something good for other people. But if we're doing it without relation to Krishna, Prabhupada makes it clear it's better, but still less intelligent. So there's many ways of doing mundane activities. And this is very, very important. These mundane activities, such as doing good in the form of society, community, etc., is a partial manifestation of the same original feeling, the same which a pure entity feels happiness by the happiness of the Supreme Lord. In other words, when I do good, I'm a community worker and I'm feeding the homeless, I'm doing goodness. That person is getting a higher taste. It's a partial manifestation because they're doing seva, as Krishna said in the 12th chapter Gita. They're sacrificing the fruit of their work for others. They're getting the taste, but it's just the very beginning taste. And what's recommended herein is go for the higher taste. Then all the lower tastes are taken care of. As Prabhupada loves to say, when you have $1 million, your 10-cent problems are over. Some of you have been in a position, maybe very poor. When I lived in India, my salary was very, very low, a few hundred rupees a month. So sometimes at the end of the month, my 10-cent problem was very severe, very, very severe. Like, what am I going to eat? A very severe problem. And then sometimes somebody would send me $10 from home, which in that days was a lot of money. And then my 10-cent problem was immediately over. So we're saying in the same way with Krishna, your big problems are over. Now, I am going to not read any more on the purport. You can all read it on your own. I'm going to go read the verse again and then answer any questions in a few minutes we have left. A person who has broader intelligence, whether he be full of all material desire or without any material desire or desiring liberation, must by all means worship the supreme whole, the personality of Godhead. Are there any questions, comments, reflections, or criticisms which you can put in the chat? Yes, go on, Prabhu. I see you one hand raised. It's a little blurry my screen, so I can't see who's who.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you so much for giving class. My name is Evan. I'm not sure if you know me that well.
I'm having trouble hearing you.
Hare Krishna. Sorry.
Try again.
My name is Evan.
Yes, Evan.
Thank you for giving class. I was wondering, in this purport, Prabhupada says that one should engage in bhakti yoga, like if one wants material desires, if one wants liberation. And I'm trying to understand because it seems like it's also an offense to chant the Maha Mantra and expect liberation and material desires. That's, I think, the 7th offense. And recently in another purport that I read in the 2nd chapter, I can't remember which one, I was just trying to find it, but he said that when somebody isn't able to understand that God is a person, then they should engage in impersonalism and then become elevated, or just the practice of mystic yoga. So I'm trying to understand why he says here that one should engage in bhakti yoga if they desire liberation. It seems like it can be offensive to bhakti yoga and the holy name to chant it for that selfish desire.
Well, your question tells me you listened very carefully. You were, as we like to say, mindful, or as others would say, I guess, woke. You've asked probably one of the best questions you can ask in relation to this verse. And the answer is yes. Okay, next question. Okay, no, we'll do a little better than that. Okay, you've asked the very appropriate question, because why would one, if one desires liberation, which is not devotional service, why worship the Supreme Lord? Because if you worship the Supreme Lord, you're like Dhruva Maharaj. He went into the forest and looking for power to basically get some kind of revenge or justice. And when he found the Supreme Lord, he said, I was looking for broken glass and I found a diamond. Because I didn't need the power, I found the Supreme Lord. So if you're looking for liberation, you worship the Supreme Lord, you'll find that that's broken glass compared to the diamond you have. So whatever, if you want material desire, you want liberation, whatever you want, if you actually engage in the powerful process of bhakti yoga, you get it. Now, let's put this in context. In other yugas, you had to go through various processes. But in Kali Yuga, people are, and this is discussed later on in this very chapter, people are like hogs, dogs, camels, asses. That's one of the verses coming up in a little bit. People are short attention span, not very intelligent. Look at their lifestyle. People are intoxicated, they're extraordinarily lusty, they're extraordinarily materialistic. I mean, it's a rough time. And we're surrounded by that. And so in order to rise above it, Lord Chaitanya appeared about the same time Columbus was trying to find a way to India. He would have done better if he made it to India, because then he would have met Lord Chaitanya, but he didn't. So he was, looking for the wealth of India. About that time, Lord Chaitanya then came, incarnation, said, okay, this is a rough age. Things are going to get worse. So let us just give the direct, easiest path. So in other ages, you would have to go through the step by step. But here, the Bhagavatam, it's just like sometimes you go to a very tall building. And I went to the New World Trade Center, so it's 100 stories high. And you can walk up the steps, but it will take a long time, or you get the elevator. I'd never seen the elevator go so fast. You feel like you're in a rocket ship. I mean, whoo! I mean, just the blink of an eye, you've gone 100 stories, incredibly fast. So this is like the elevator. Because if we're going to try to walk up the 100 flights, we probably aren't going to make it. So we're given a little special privilege. So for one who wants liberation, that's okay. We all, somebody wants liberation, somebody wants fame, somebody wants this. But if you dovetail in devotional service, your actual desires get purified. Just like things get very dirty, like water can be very, very dirty outside. But when the sun, even there's a big puddle and a dog does his thing in the middle of a puddle, it's the dirtiest water you might imagine. But when the sun evaporates that water, that very same water, when it evaporates, becomes absolutely drinkable and pure. So that's the privilege we've been giving. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, if you have more, I'll try. It's a good question. And that question can go on for hours of discussion.
I just have a quick follow-up. So what happens if somebody commits the seventh offense and chants the holy name with, like, as a ritualistic activity for fruits? What happens? Do they get the fruits, or do they not experience the true holy name?
Oh, no, is it if they have desire for fruits and they chant the holy name, what happens?
Yeah, if they chant it as a fruitive activity.
Well, if they're lucky, they get pure devotional service. If they're less lucky, they get the fruits. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes Krishna says, oh, you have this desire. Okay, just go experience it. The karma, sometimes up, sometimes down. And then sometimes we're given eventually we approach the deities and say, I have all these desires, but please. And when we chant japa, it's so important our japa be prayerful. We pray while chanting. Our mind can handle praying and chanting and listening at the same time. So we're praying, maybe even between mantras, Krishna, please, I want to know you. That I love that song, My Sweet Lord. You all know that song, don't you? Anybody not know the song, My Sweet Lord? Maybe somebody doesn't. George Harrison is singing very plaintively, I really want to know you. And he's saying it, singing to Lord Krishna with such devotion. But it takes so long. And he's lamenting. I mean, George Harrison was a devotee, and he's very dedicated to Prabhupada. You can read the wonderful spiritual biography, George Harrison, by our god brother Yogeshwar. This spirit thing's called The Spiritual Journey of George Harrison. When Yogeshwar was not a devotee, he went to visit Paris. He was studying music. Went to visit London. He was studying music in Paris. And he ran into devotees, and they invited him to jump in a van. Didn't even know where he was going. But then when they heard he was a keyboardist, they said, oh, we need a keyboardist. So he jumped in the van and didn't even know where he was going. In those days, we did all those things. And he ended up in Apple Studios. And they were jamming to produce one of the Hare Krishna albums with George Harrison playing guitar. He wasn't allowed to sing due to the Apple contract he had, but he could play guitar. So he gave him the whole best recording studio in the world to record an album. And then Yogi's, one of his earliest contacts with devotees was jamming with George Harrison. And George Harrison was, that song, it really gives the mood for chanting japa. I really want to know you, but it takes so long. So we pray like that, and then it happens. So that's the chanting japa in that prayerful mood. Gradually we see material desires we didn't know we have start surfacing. There's a whole discussion of this in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. The material desires we didn't even know become apparent because we're mindful. We become aware. And as they come up, we're watering our devotional root, the weeds come. And then by good association, that's the only way. We pluck the weeds that start growing as we water our devotional creeper. And then the creeper gets stronger and stronger as the weeds go away. There's one funny story. Burijan is one of the most knowledgeable, wisest devotees of the movement. Prabhupada sent him and his wife to Hong Kong. And in fact, his wife is very famous. Just last week, Prime Minister Modi of India gave his monthly address. And in the address, he talked about Burijan's wife. And he described that she was a very famous actress. You all heard of Mickey Jagger? Maybe a famous actor. She appeared in a movie with Mickey Jagger. She was going to be one of the top movie stars. And then she met the devotees and became a devotee. And very talented lady. So she lived for 13 years in Vrindavan. This is Prime Minister Modi of India talking just days ago. And he, in his monthly address in Hindi, he says, I heard the address. He says, and she lived there, and Vrindavan so struck her so deeply that when she moved to Perth, she set up, it's very artistic, a whole village, a diorama display that looks like Vrindavan. So when you go there, you feel like you're in Vrindavan with a hill and trees and all ghats. And she set up this whole exhibit. And then Prime Minister Modi says, so wherever she goes, she took Vrindavan with her. And when you have Krishna Bhakti, you have everything. This is the Prime Minister of India speaking just days ago. So it's that kind of mood in which we get closer and closer to Krishna by the prayerful approach. So I hope that answers your question. I bounced around a little bit. I think it's time, classes. Is there Krishna lunch today?
Yes.
So I think we have to end now. Otherwise, they take a big hook and they yank me away. So with that, I wasn't sure what was going on. So with that, I better stop here. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Whether the Prabhu ki